You're welcome back to the conversation. We're now turning our attention to Malawi, where police said about 76 protesters are expected to appear in court to face charges of unlawful assembly and inciting violence. This follows the arrest on Wednesday when protests against the High Court of Malawi led to clashes with police and the looting of shops in the capital, Lilongwe. The clashes started after the High Court of Malawi granted an injunction to business owners who wanted to block the protesters fearing property damage. Those arrested include 4 leaders of human rights ambassadors groups which organized the demonstrations. Some rights campaigners accused the police of using excessive force in trying to stop the protest. Government spokesperson Gospel Kazako said as much as the government respects people's rights to hold peaceful demonstrations, it is unfortunate that organizers of Wednesday's protest defied a court order to stop the planned protest. Now, joining me live this evening from the Malawian capital, Lilongwe, is Suzko Chitete, Assistant Bureau Chief of the Nation Publications Limited. I also have political scientist Ndule Onwakasungula, a human rights activist. They both joined from Lilongwe, Malawi. Gentlemen, a warm welcome to you both and thanks for joining us on the conversation.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. Thank you.
I'd like to start with you, Suzko. The protests were held to protest the high cost of commodities, which is as a result of global economic realities. Similar protests have also been held in different parts of the world. What's your take on yesterday's protest?
Well, I would say the protests were never supposed to take place because there was an 11th hour court order stopping the same. But I would say the protests, are justified. These are citizens with their own rights. If they see things going wrong, they have a right to show their frustration. So what is regrettable, though, is where people go to the court and they obtain an injunction at an 11th hour, which also somehow inflamed the illegal protests, if I call them so.
Now, thank you, Suzko. Ndule, protests in Malawi last November brought President Lazarus Chakwera's honeymoon to an abrupt end. Yesterday, we saw another round of protests. What was the government's response to the protest? And do you think the people are being hard on President Chakwera, knowing he came into office in the middle of a pandemic, plus the global economy is suffering as a result of the effects of the Russian-Ukraine war? What's your take on all of this?
I think, honestly speaking, Malawi is going through socio-economic challenges. And I think the people themselves are just responding to some of the challenges the country is facing currently. So, as Sujo said, I think as Malawians, they have the right to express their feelings, their hardships. They don't think to improve because, as you're saying, the Tonse government, actually, they were coming in, they promised Malawians a lot of things. But I think the country is right now struggling. They cannot meet the promises which they promised Malawians. So I think
Ndule, sorry to interrupt you, Ndule. You do know that, and your point is fair because the government promised they will do this and that, and then COVID happened, and we now have this war in Ukraine, which are not exactly the doings or the results of President Lazarus Chakwera. He didn't cause the war in Ukraine, and he didn't bring about COVID. So don't you think the people Malawians should at least be realistic about their expectations, and maybe they should adjust it a little bit?
I think what government is failing is, I think, to explain to the people why the current environment is, why there's the economic challenges. I think Malawi thinks the government is failing to unpack the issues, to convince Malawians that Malawi is not an island. We are part and parcel of the global world. And what is happening in other countries also affecting Malawi. So this is a challenge, but I think it's all about politics now. To me, I feel that the issues are more political now, because the other issues which are coming in that the president should trim his powers in terms of presidential immunity. So if you look behind the scene, you find the issues are diverting now from the socio-economic to become political, and more coming like a regime change program again. So these are the issues which I think as a government, as Malawi, they need to be very cautious in how they would want to handle the current situation in the country.
Thank you, Ndule. I would like to bring in wonderful Nkuche, a political scientist who joins us also from Lilongwe. Now, wonderful, what has the government's response been to rising commodity prices and its resultant hardship on ordinary citizens of Malawi?
Yeah, thank you for hosting me. I'm currently in Zomba, not Lilongwe. Zomba, the old capital city. Yeah. As already said, there are challenges, economic challenges. And as he said, there is issue about communication for people to understand. But then we also have to realize that is exactly why people voted for a government that shouldn't just react to what is happening around, but a government which is able to find solutions to the challenges that we are going through. And then another thing that is distracting most people is that the government right now is not only handling the economic situation, but we can also take note of politics that is happening. And by politics, the government that we have got in as an alliance. And then we see some of the alliance partners, they are fighting for who is going to lead the alliance in the next coming elections. So people are frustrated with such kind of things. The economic challenges are there. People can understand them. But then they are also looking at politicians that are power hungry. All they want is about who is going to lead. And then on the other hand, we also have corruption allegations that are involving high-ranking government officials, including the name of the vice president is being mentioned. So when people are looking at these stories, they cannot understand whatever government can say about the economic challenges. It will be hard for them to understand. You know, normally it's easy to understand someone whom you are seeing that they are trying to live up to the situation. But here the government is trying to explain, and then the next day what you see is the alliance partners are fighting, and then the other day you see the corruption allegations. So it is putting governments in a fix.
Thank you, wonderful. I'd like to bring in Suzgu. Suzgu, June 2022, just last month, made it 2 years since President Lazarus Chakwera was sworn in as President of the Republic of Malawi. He ran for office on the mantra of change, and he promised 1 million jobs and a turnaround of the Malawian economy. My question to you is, how much positive change has Malawi witnessed so far, and how would you rate his administration?
Well, thank you so much. I think I pretty missed what Wandaf said because I couldn't recapture. I would say when Malawians went for, voting in June 2020 for the fresh presidential elections, they had a lot of hope because, they were coming from a background where there was a lot of corruption in the country, nepotism, tribalism, and the new administration, the Tons administration, had promised, the moon. But 2 years after, all we see are broken promises and lies, half-truths. They have really failed to live up to what they promised the people. So, for example, some of the things that Undule also mentioned about, which are quite straightforward, where the president talked about appointing a cabinet on merit and not necessarily out of political connections. But we saw a cabinet that was full of family relations, people that are close to the president, the cabinet that never inspired. I remember writing the first story about this cabinet, and we called it, we called the president a family man, because typically what he did in this first cabinet was to include family members. So
but
he disappointed from the
He's reshuffled that cabinet now, and has that led to any improvements of any sort?
Nothing like an improvement. We still have the same faces in the same cabinet, and this cabinet is bloated, unlike the previous cabinet under the previous administration, where we had a 20-member cabinet. But here we have almost 30 members of cabinet. And again, the president said he would subject his cabinet to a periodic performance assessment, and these results would be made public. Ministers would be interviewed publicly. So those that failed the assessment will be kicked out, and new ones will be brought on board. We haven't seen that assessment taking place. He said after 5 months, and that assessment has not happened for 2 years. The president himself said, he would want to reduce his own powers as a president. 2 years after, we still see a president who wields too much power, just like his predecessors. He said police officers would not be lined along the street as his convoy passes from one place to another. We see police officers lined up the street. He is also the chancellor of the public universities, something that he promised that he would not be the chancellor of the public university. So here you see somebody who has typically failed to live by what he promised. And these are not too hard things to change. Along the way, we hear the president saying, reducing his powers is not his priority. So there are several examples where, you talk about corruption itself. There are more cases of corruption under this new regime. His own, he has fired some of his top aides, from advisors to some of the ministers. They're answering corruption charges. So this again, it's one of the broken promises, I would say. And if we were to add on that list, we have also seen some questionable appointments. You'd actually say the president, the president's daughter was appointed from a diplomatic mission, in London. Then, such kind of things do not really inspire confidence from what he promised. I think the one positive I should add, maybe it's about women empowerment. Really, we have seen a significant number of women occupying very important positions. Just today, we've woken up to some good news where the president has appointed a female for an inspector general of police. So that is the move in the right direction.
Okay.
But there are more promises that have been broken and that have not been fulfilled, and the positives really are outnumbered by the negatives, I should say.
Thank you, Susgu. Ndule, Susgu did touch on the topic of corruption. President Lazarus Chakwera, a pastor turned politician, said the fight against corruption was one of the pillars of his campaign. And my question is, how has he performed so far in terms of ridding Malawi of corruption? We've seen high-profile cases. Even his own vice president has been investigated. He did get rid of the Inspector General of Police for allegations of corruption. So how would you score his performance when it comes to corruption?
Yeah, I think, honestly speaking, I think he's doing fine in terms of fighting corruption, although challenges are there. Because for the first time, I think we saw ministers being arrested and charged, and for the first time again, the whole ACB report, which implicated the vice president and the other high officials in government, being released to Malawians. So to me, this is very, very positive. And I think as a president, he's committed to fighting corruption, but I think he might have some challenges in terms of how you want to address the issues. Because if you look at the report of corruption, almost the whole system is implicated. Now, how does the president deal with that issue? It is very difficult for him. But I think that's why it's important for the Anti-Corruption Bureau itself to be fully independent so that they can handle the issues of corruption for the interest and benefit of Malawians. Because Malawians, I think, are looking forward to see how the president is going to deal with those people who have been implicated. Already, he made a decision in terms of the vice president and some other officials like the IG and the chief of staff. But there's a long list of key government officials in terms of their involvement in the
There's
SATA.
still much more work to be done. Thank you, Ndule. And finally, wonderful, just before we wrap up our conversation, President Chikwera promised to create 1 million jobs and set Malawi on the path to being as rich as South Africa or Botswana by the 2060s, upper middle income countries with GDP per capita of about $5,500 and $6,000 respectively. These are ambitious goals for a country with a GDP below $700 per capita. Is there still time for President Chikwera to salvage his record before the next elections? I would appreciate if you can answer this question in less than a minute. Wonderful.
Yes, the next election is going to be in May 2025, and that is almost 3 years from now. So to say that there is enough time, I do not think that is the case. The president was supposed to set the ball rolling from June 2020 when he got into office. But now 2 years has gone in as far as the 1 million job promise is concerned. 2 years has gone. We haven't seen anything about that promise. Although the government claims that they have done something, but as Malawians, we are yet to see that. So in the next coming election, that is one of the promise that is going to haunt the president and also the entire alliance if it will still be together by the next election. So realistically, there is no time for the president to salvage himself in as far as that promise is concerned, because time has already been lost.
I'd like to say a very big thank you to you, gentlemen. Susgo Chitete from Lilongwe, wonderful Nkuche from Zomba, and Ndule Wakasungula also joining from Lilongwe. Thank you very much for being a part of this broadcast, and we do appreciate your insights. This is where we draw the curtains on today's edition of The Conversation. In the first half of the show, we did look at protests. We did look at the cooperation agreement signed between the Democratic Party and the ruling National Resistance Movement in Uganda. And we just concluded our conversation on commodity price increases protests in Malawi. On behalf of the team and I'll say thank you to you all for being a part of the program. Until next time, I'm Benga Aboroa. Bye-bye.